Even when she was hungry, Katherine wasn't allowed to eat between meals. This family rule was immovable. Fiona, on the other hand, grew up under a different rule, but still with the same effect. In her family, nothing was said out loud, but everyone understood. You didn't ask for food because there might not be enough. Both followed these family rules, which meant both of them were hungry. But it's what they did to solve their hunger that they are ashamed of. Keep listening to hear how their food stories cause weight regain. Hi there, it's Bronwyn. Welcome back to Before Dieting. If you're new here, this is the podcast where we have blame and shame-free conversations about the real causes of weight regain. It's also where I do my best to put an end to the weight loss myth that all women need to do is to just try harder, as if. Today I'm continuing our series of 10 women's food stories, and in this episode I want to talk to you about Katherine and Fiona and their family food rules. Now, the rules I'm talking about here are not dieting rules or guidelines for better nutrition. These are the food and eating rules that you learned in your origin family. The rules that you didn't or couldn't question, the ones that just became absorbed as normal. And as you'll hear with Katherine and Fiona today, like many women, those rules for food and eating didn't meet their needs. Here's what's interesting about food rules. You don't get to weigh them up and think, yes, this makes sense for me. You would have been 5 or 8 or 12 years of age, and it was the people who fed you that set those rules. Some rules were spoken out loud. For some, all it took was a parent's raised eyebrow to communicate the rule. Some were never voiced, but everyone in the family knew what they were. A food rule that everybody has heard is finish everything on your plate. But there are many, many other rules that are specific to families. What about some other ones like don't ask for seconds or don't be greedy? Again, a reminder, this isn't about blaming parents or carers because they too acquired their rules from someone or somewhere else as well. Nobody gets to escape this. Also, when we put food rules in the right context, they can often make perfect sense. But a rule absorbed at age 7 doesn't come with an expiry date. It doesn't update itself when you grow up, earn money, and you have your own kitchen. It just keeps running in the background, shaping what you eat and how you eat. And most of that happens under the surface without you even realising it. So this is where Katherine and Fiona's stories come into it. When Katherine told me her father had a rule of no eating between meals, she thought he wanted his children to come to the table hungry so they would appreciate the food. The only problem was Katherine was a young teenager growing fast, playing sport and every day using up lots of energy. She was expected to wait until the next meal, even if that meant going 5 or 6 hours without eating. She told me she lived with constant hunger during her young teenage years. Now let's include Fiona in this story. Her food rules were different, but her life was very similar. In her family, nothing was said out loud, but everybody understood the rule, you didn't ask for food because there isn't enough. On the outside, both girls were obeying these rules. They ate what they were given, they didn't ask for more, but both of them were hungry. Whether that be physically hungry or just needing some comfort food, you can't stop eating just because there's a rule. So both of them found ways around it. And what that looked like was sneaking and stealing food, stealing money and spending it on things to eat, trying to get to eat at friends' houses. They would take whatever was available to get rid of their hunger. And this is where the shame cuts in. Not only about the stealing, but Katherine felt shame for disobeying her father, and Fiona felt the same for being disloyal to her mother. You might be able to start to see this is where an eating system has its origins. Not after the dieting starts, not even in adulthood. Back then, when the rules around food didn't match what their bodies needed, they had to survive alongside those rules. Because those early experiences don't stay in childhood, they become part of the eating system they carried into their adult life. Katherine grew up and Fiona grew up, and now both can eat whenever and whatever they want. There's food in the cupboard, there's money to buy more, and no one is stopping them from eating anything. Their hunger has been solved, but their food story, the rules and the eating system those early years created is carried forward. When your brain learns that lesson early enough, it creates a system so you never get to feel that hungry again. So in one sense, food becomes the insurance policy where you eat before you're hungry. You eat just in case. You eat enough to feel safe. And you eat enough to make sure the desperate feeling of hunger never comes back. And an important aspect of this type of eating is that it needs to be done alone, so no one is watching or judging. And alone in particular, so you can eat without needing anyone's permission to eat what you want and how much. So let's fast forward to today. Now Katherine and Fiona are in their early 50s. They're no longer children trying to solve hunger anymore, so now it looks different. It looks like they're overeating. It looks like they lack willpower. It looks like they've got a weight problem. But that may be what other people see, but under the surface, an eating system is still at work, making sure those experiences of feeling desperately hungry as a child never happen again. What happened with Katherine and Fiona are some of the reasons I spend so much time telling women's food stories. Most women would rather leave the past in the past. They want to write a new food story, one where they eat for health, to feel comfortable at their body weight, and aren't constantly being hijacked by thoughts about food, eating, and weight. And when you hear someone else's story, it's often easier to see what you can't see in your own. We all have blind spots when we're living inside our own history. Other women's stories can help you step outside your own shell and start to understand your reactions with a bit more clarity and hopefully a bit more compassion. Also, when you hear these stories in the right context, you start to see there are reasons for the way you eat now that go much deeper than laziness or lack of willpower. Reasons that make sense once you can finally see them. Because when survival means eating in secret, it changes your whole relationship with food. Food stops being about nourishment. It becomes something you consciously control all day and then lose control with later in the afternoon and night. It's something where you need to eat for relief, but you also shame yourself for it. Most women can follow some diet rules for a while, but when the pressure builds, the system takes over. Not because you don't know what to do, but because the blueprint for this was built a long time ago. And that's why in this work we go back to the food story again and again, because the eating system you have today started at someone else's table. In this episode, I wanted you to see how Katherine and Fiona's early food rules became part of an eating system that keeps running long after the original circumstances have changed. So let's recap on what their stories show. First off, many of the rules driving their eating today came from that origin family and long before the weight gain and dieting ever started. And second, their family food rules didn't align with what was needed, so they both found ways to get food and take care of themselves. But the problem is it left them feeling shamed. And the third thing is their early eating behaviours distilled into an eating system they carried into their adult life. That eating system runs on autopilot, and it is the reason why their weight cycles up and down. This is why knowing your food story and the rules it contains matters, not to blame the past, but to see how the eating system you have now was built. And hopefully by now you might see that knowing your food story is the necessary first step to rewriting a new one. So before you grab another diet, check out the programs I've written that are specific to discovering that food story, its food rules and the eating system that you might be living with now. You can find everything you need at waitingforhappiness.com.au. Thanks for listening in, and I'll talk with you next week.